Quick introductions here. The San Diego team looks. If you've been to a startup grind event, you may have not seen us. But the new San Diego team is going to be myself as director, and Miss Mia Mian in the window. So she is my co-director. Together we make the dream team. So we're looking to put on some great events for you this year. So. Our sponsors are AppDev360, so for your development needs, they also provided our lovely food in the back, so please eat as much as you can and thank them for that. For any questions about that, please refer to Mia. And then, so our upcoming events are going to be Chris Lesser with Lucky Bolt, and then Neil Bloom from Hired. So that's going to be February and March, respectively. Our events are going to be the second Thursday of every month. And lastly, the most important, we have Ashok Kamal as our guest tonight. You are in for a treat. So with that said, I'm going to get started. Please forgive me for any mishaps. It's my first time, but I'm excited. So have a great time. Let's have fun. Ashok. So in getting started here, I want to know, like, where did you grow up, and also where did you go to school? Like, how did these influence who you are today?
First, I just want to say thanks. And we're talking about mishaps. Look, you're already winning, man. Look at all these great people that you have at this event today. But Happy New Year, to everybody. I think there's like a couple of days left where you can say Happy New Year without being annoying and obnoxious. So I'm going to get my last one out right now. Happy New Year. And thank you, Brandon and Mia, for putting together this event. I grew up in Boston originally. Lived there for the first 21 years of my life, and then moved to New York City, and moved from there to here. It's a different culture, obviously. That's why I chose to make the shift to SoCal. When I first moved here, I met some of the people in this room, including my friend Brant Cooper, and he warned me. A lot of people come here, and it's so easy to just surf, which I'm learning how to do. Grandview Beach right over here. And just hang out at coffee shops, and you risk becoming deactivated is the exact word that Brant used, and it's tempting for sure. But I guess coming up in the East Coast, we tend to be pretty gritty, and so if anything, maybe it's a little harder for me to deactivate myself, for better or for worse. And I think that's one of the ways that my upbringing has shaped, what I'm doing right now.
Absolutely, but we need movers and shakers because I feel like it shows us like we might need to do a little more.
It's all about a balance.
We don't always
work-life harmony, kind of is a constant struggle, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
So with that in mind, I asked that question because all of your ventures so far have seemed to fall under the umbrella of social entrepreneurship. So what, perhaps either in growing up or just what that was always in you, made you feel like this was your calling to do this?
Mm-hmm. So, I think, as an entrepreneur, your experiences, that's the lens that you see life through. And, for me, I was fortunate to have parents that, I think, they're very humble people, but, they're very progressive, people. They're, hippies. And, my mom, raised me recycling, plastic tubs. And, this is 1980s recycling. My father was putting a solar panel, on our apartment building, kind of in inner city Boston, when I was a kid. I mean, I helped him build solar cookers out of cardboard boxes, literally. So I had, green in my genes. Hopefully has contributed to me wanting to kind of continue to champion that spirit. And my experience growing up, I went to a high school that was literally considered a dropout factory, by John Hopkins, and they looked at the worst schools, kind of in inner cities across America. And I went and graduated from a school like that. So of course, if people are dropping out of school, that means that they're getting incarcerated, teen pregnancies, it's, gang, problems, homicides, I mean, the works. And this is, high school. So, of course that shapes you, and it's your community. So you can either, fall into that trap, you can get depressed, or you can try and do something about it. So for me, entrepreneurship, is the vehicle for me to try and do something about some of, these problems that I experienced. And there's a lot of other people that are doing good things too. So for me, it's about connecting and collaborating, with those like-minded people.
Absolutely. So this might be my favorite company name I've ever heard of, and hearing your high school story, I'm not sure if this stems into it, but Raptivism Records. I want to hear about this. How did this start?
Yeah, so Raptivism was my first serious, kind of business, and probably like a lot of people in this room, I hustled this, that, and the other thing, from a young age. But Raptivism was a hip hop record label dedicated to creating awareness on social issues. So I was in college when we started that. I was like 19 years old. I had 2 partners, and the first issue that we decided to create, kind of a campaign around, it was the prison industrial complex. So the privatization of prisons, which, now, again, this was 99, so now, fast forward, almost 20 years later, and just recently, sort of the federal, regulation around private prisons has changed, and they're now being closed, but this was almost 20 years ago we were talking about this. So that was sort of the, catalyst behind Raptivism, was looking at this one issue that of course affected a lot of the communities that rappers and we came from. The South Bronx, which is obviously one of the big, very disadvantaged parts of New York City.
Of course.
It was the poorest congressional district in the U.S. when hip hop was born, in the 70s, and still in the late 90s, the South Bronx was the poorest congressional district in the U.S. despite hip hop becoming at that point a multi-billion-dollar industry itself. So Raptivism was a kind of a platform to talk about whether it's domestic violence or prisons or eating healthier, all these issues. And I think because we were trying to do something innovative, we got a lot of attention, kind of from the university circuit. The first time I ever came to California, I was, like I said, maybe 20 at that time, so a year or so after we started. It was at UC Santa Cruz, and I was speaking at a conference called Education, Not Incarceration, about this issue. It was a student movement. At that point, for the first time, California began spending more on its prison system than its public education system. So the lines crossed in the wrong way. So that was kind of the call to action for this this movement. And that created then a movement with Raptivism, where we said, well, let's not stop at prisons. Let's talk about health. Let's talk about Cuba. Let's talk about police brutality. Let's talk about domestic violence. Let's talk about fatherhood. Let's talk about all these other issues. And that's the idea. It wasn't just rap. It wasn't just activism. It was Raptivism. And we had a good, solid 7-year run in that business in New York City to this day. I meet a lot of people that know artists that we work with or projects that we put out. Yeah, it was a great legacy. But I also learned some hard lessons too in business, through Raptivism, and ultimately closing it down after 6 years.
Absolutely. Do you mind perhaps expanding on what these hardships may be?
Yeah, in terms of the business side, well, one, we failed ultimately. So we succeeded in some ways, in that we sold $1 million plus, of records over time. We released, albums and singles by artists that are to this day popular still and people remember. We worked with guys that ended up becoming platinum artists like David Banner, and we were working with Common and early Kanye West. I mean, they were not even kind of that well known at the time. They were underground superstars. We were underground. This is indie, gritty, underground New York City stuff. But at the end of the day, we got disrupted. So most of our sales were either vinyl or CDs, through traditional brick and mortar outlets like Tower Records, for example. Some people here might remember Tower Records. And Tower Records went out of business. And when Tower Records goes out of business, then one of our primary point of contact to the consumer disappears, right? So at the same time, things are moving into the internet, and even though we're fairly young, kind of we would have liked to think cutting edge entrepreneurs, the speed of disruption happens really fast. That's the innovator's dilemma, right? So we didn't catch up fast enough, and ultimately we lost more business than we were able to recreate in a short enough period of time. And it comes to working capital and all these other issues that we decided it was time to just know when to say when, and that's always a struggle for an entrepreneur. Is when kind of the course has, kind of made it, the journey is at the end of the journey, and so we did, and we lived to see another day, and hopefully we did something, important, kind of, through that process.
Absolutely. So, as far as other experiences, it seems like there was a slight overlap between you being at Raptivism and Directions for Our Youth.
Yeah.
So, how did that opportunity arise?
Yeah, so when I moved to New York, I mean, one of my other passions, and Raptivism was about empowering, many of these communities that were being affected by, the prison system, for example. But I also wanted to, directly be involved, kind of in a lot of these young people's lives, having myself benefited from different mentorship programs and nonprofits in my life. So I started working at an organization called Directions for Our Youth. Does life skills programs with kids throughout New York City. We were in like 60 schools, kind of at the peak of my time there. And for me, it was very fulfilling, while on the one side, kind of, we hired some people at Raptivism, so then I eventually was, just sort of moonlighting there, and then spending more of my time doing the nonprofit, which for me then was sort of a sector switch. And I actually found that work really rewarding. And especially at that point in my life, obviously entrepreneurship is a struggle. Everybody, startup grind. It's not called startup love, startup joy. It's called startup grind. It's a fucking grind. That's the point. So one of the things I've learned is you have to refresh yourself, kind of, and know when to push, know when to pull. And for me, DFOY, Directions for Our Youth, was sort of a, a little bit more of a, kind of. I wouldn't call it a break because it's difficult doing that work too when you're dealing with kids and their, their struggles, but it was a way of repotting myself, to be able to refresh myself, and I ended up working at DFOY for a good 5 years and ran the organization before I went back to grad school, and then kind of had the next repotting myself. So.
Okay, so one question I have about that is, because I can imagine you aren't the only person that's ever tried to do two things at the same time, especially for all of those entrepreneurs out there that perhaps have a job in addition to starting another company, or however it works. They're in multiple things.
Yeah.
How do you feel that you were able to juggle that?
Yeah, that's a constant struggle, right? And when that, equation goes out of balance, is when you start getting burnout and worse. Kind of that happens. So I think there's no right answer. I mean, for me, it's just about. One, trying to be supported by a great group of people in your life. Whether it's your family, your significant other, your co-founders, your colleagues. It takes a village, right, to create a startup. And I think that was probably the people that I built those organizations with are to this day some of my best friends. Because again, we were in there together. Kind of. Following, sort of a North Star, that you're passionate about, and that's the best therapy.
Absolutely. So you were a young guy. You still are a young guy. You were a young guy.
It's all relative.
But you were a relatively young guy at that point in time, like doing all of these things. Right. What do you feel like at that point in time that you still hold with you today, like either the struggle or the highest thing that you love the most, that you still have it in you today from that point in time?
Faith, fight,
Yes.
focus, fun, all of those things, the F words,
Wow.
Those to me, are what it takes to be a force in life.
My favorite words. So, I'm going to tell you all, going through Ashok's LinkedIn is one of the most amazing things ever, and I had no clue where to pinpoint any specific thing. So going forward from those experiences, I want to know, can you tell me, about your experiences that led up to just before you moving to California?
Yeah, I mean, going through my own LinkedIn, it's kind of chaotic. I'm sure that I could, reverse engineer it. But from Raptivism, which that was sort of, early to mid 2000s, kind of when, that sort of started, turning over the wrong way, and then, Directions for Our Youth, and then I went to business school, kind of is the bottom line, because again, I wanted to, kind of reset my trajectory. Absolutely. And I ended up, kind of studying green finance, but then entering business plan competition, which I wasn't expecting to do, but got there to school, was sort of opportunistic, and started a company making backpacks out of recycled plastic bottles. And that, initial, sort of, version of the company ended up pivoting, as we call it today, into software for companies that want to go green. So we went from these physical products to software. And it took kind of several twists and turns, but. The common thread was the mission, which actually never changed. That company is called Venue. It still exists today.
Okay.
And the goal was promoting a new lifestyle of sustainability.
Okay.
And so whether it was the backpacks made out of plastic bottles, or whether ultimately it was the app to promote recycling that we developed, the goal was always, the mission was the same.
Okay.
And that then ultimately led me into some, I guess, commercial success. And then when I got out of that company and started another one with a friend of mine who I had met through my circles of the startup world, and then decided I wanted to move to California because I could. And I visited a buddy of mine out here, Miguel, one of my best friends ever growing up, and he was in Solana, and I was amazed by kind of this, right? The beach and the people and everything, and I said I'm moving out here, and then not long thereafter I ended up moving, and then got involved with Outside where we are here today, and probably met you like a month or something after that. So the rest is history.
So taking just one step back before you actually got to California, I was reading in your post from the suit to the wetsuit. You can catch us on his LinkedIn, and I saw that like how the end of a few of the things that you were doing while you were still on the East Coast led you to significant burnout.
Yeah.
Do you mind going into where you were at this point in time, what was happening here that caused this burnout?
Yeah, well, I was living in New York City for 15 years, kind of at that point, and when I came to visit, Miguel here, I think I was sort of at the end of my rope, knowing that I just wanted to change my lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Anybody who's lived in New York City knows, it's a notorious grind. It's a life grind. Kind of.
Absolutely.
And when you got startups on top of that, now it's just like you're really, kind of pushing the limits. Kind of, especially as you get older, Brett. I'm not as young as I was, when Raptivism started. So I think I just, wanted to, kind of try something new.
Absolutely.
And the circumstances, of my friend, kind of who was about to have his first child, kind of, just seeing these, bluer, I guess, pastures, and reminding me of when I first came to California in Santa Cruz, which, as much as I love, Santa Cruz, Encinitas, where I live in Cardiff now, was like an even better version of Santa Cruz. So it brought me back to that 20 years before when I came out here, and I was just like, I think this is a place where, I can just, find some really great, peace. And the flip side of that is, I was, easily working 15-hour days, in New York City, schlepping through, the trains, an hour every single day, and kind of just trying to, survive, in the rat race. And it really doesn't matter how much money you're making, kind of, or how nice your, house is. And of course, especially in a place like that, there's always literally thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who are doing a lot better, kind of than you are. I don't want to, make it seem like I was, living on Central Park West, kind of in a penthouse. But I was doing fine, and I bought my own place and all that. But the, sort of lifestyle, kind of that you had to, maintain just to be able to, stay above water. It was exhausting. That's the bottom line. So I just felt like, it was the right time, kind of to switch it up and take my, listen to my body and listen to my mind and listen to my spirit and listen to my soul. If I'm feeling like I'm burnt out, well,
Absolutely.
I'm fortunate enough that I could try something else. That's a luxury that not everybody has. So for me, it was like, okay, this is the opportunity. Listen to the universe. Try something else, and that's how I made it out.
Absolutely. So I love that you made the point of listening to yourself, your body, and focusing on you, because I feel like we live in a culture perhaps where the 15-hour, the 18-hour day, the I haven't slept in 3 days kind of thing is almost applauded. You know, and I feel that, you know, a lot of people burn out, but not only burn out, even if they're still into what they're doing, I feel like a lot of people like go into depression, or they have anxiety, or there's some other deterioration that they experience. What are your thoughts on, you know, being able to facilitate more open conversations about this? Because I personally feel like a lot of people, you know, they think of startups and like, you know, this whole community, and they only think of acquisitions and unicorns, you know, and I'm like, no. And I'm like, no, like these people are working out here. Like, what do you feel about, you know, making an open conversation about this kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think there's a huge, you know, kind of startup myth, and, you know, this sort of imposter syndrome, you know, kind of, you know, where, you know, the entrepreneur, you know, knows they're naked in the mirror, but, you know, to the rest of the world is trying to put on this, you know, facade of, you know, everything kind of, you know, crushing it, you know, and all the time. And my experience is just that's just not how it's been. I mean, startups are this constant, you know, conflict between, you know, miracles and disasters. That's every single day, you know, kind of, you're living in this universe, you know, kind of, and it's extremely, like I said, exhausting, you know, kind of for the founder, you know, who has people dependent on them, whether it's their employees, their customers, their investors. I mean, that is a lot of pressure, you know, to have on you. And then you've got probably in your own personal life, you know, your mom's sick, or you know, your, you know, all kinds of, your dog just died. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are going on, right? So it's a lot to digest. I think the important thing is in the last maybe seems like year or so, there's been a much greater acknowledgement and therefore conversation around, you know, these issues such as depression and substance abuse and even suicide, you know, within the entrepreneurial community. I mean, there have been some high profile, I mean, people that did have $1 million in, you know, fundraising, that were building unicorns, you know, kind of, who, you know, took their own life.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, unfortunately, you know, kind of sometimes it takes those sort of, you know, shocking events to get people to, you know, really talk about, you know, an issue and address it, you know. So people like Brad Feld, you know, kind of have written about, you know, their own depression, you know, kind of the struggles, you know, that they face, and have been really open. And the fact that we have people like Brad Feld who are as successful as you can be in this game, you know, saying that this is a problem, and, you know, saying, I have, you know, confronted this myself, and here's some of the ways that I've dealt with it. I think it's very liberating for them, maybe people who aren't quite at that level, you know, to say, you know what, I'm dealing with that problem too, you know, and I appreciate you having the courage, you know, and the honesty to address it. And I think, you know, that's now created, you know, more of a dialogue, you know, around the issue, where no one should feel ashamed, you know, kind of, or isolated, you know, or like they, you know, are wrong, you know, kind of in dealing with these struggles that come with entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is going to be a struggle no matter what, but it's either going to be a beautiful struggle or it's going to be a horrible struggle. You know, I mean, when you deal with it and you have the right people around you, then, you know, it can be beautiful.
Mixture of both in my case.
Yeah.
So
and that's just every hour. You know, so.
That's just on the hour. So going forward, like, how do you think you can perhaps even tell people here or anyone else that's viewing, like, how can they begin in their own organizations to like have these conversations that are hard to have?
Yeah. So I can just tell you some of like the, you know, tactics that I've employed, you know, personally. You know, one, it's, you know, being close to my family and loved ones. You know, so making sure that regardless of what work I have to do, that I carve out, even if it means sometimes that work doesn't get done at the, you know, optimum moment, that I spend that time, you know, kind of with people that I love outside of work. So that's one thing. Another is just, you know, sort of physical, you know, kind of exercise, you know, and having something outside, you know, of the business that you enjoy doing. So for me, you know, it's been learning how to surf. You know, in New York City, it was fantasy baseball, you know, which I also still love. But you got to have something, you know, kind of, or some things even.
Absolutely.
You know, I like cooking, you know, that you do that just kind of give you, you know, that mental headspace to not always be on.
Absolutely.
And then the other is, I think, community. So, you know, again, when I was in New York, I started a group called Entrepreneurs Anonymous. It was basically just a, you know, kind of fun little gathering of, you know, founders to commiserate and, you know, kind of just be honest, you know, kind of with each other about the issues that, you know, you're dealing with in your life, you know, in your company and all that. And, you know, I think those are things that people can recreate anywhere that you are. You know,
absolutely.
Kind of, you know, having your, you know, loved ones as a priority, taking care of yourself, you know, kind of in terms of your health, and having a community around you that's supportive.
Of course. I love that. Please bring an Entrepreneurs Anonymous chapter to San Diego.
We have a founders drinking club, so it's, we've already started.
Go both ways. One's Tuesday night, the other one's Wednesday.
Right.
We need to pause the event now so I can take notes. No.
Shout out to Tim Rout and Neil and everybody that's been participating in organizing that too.
I love that. So fast forwarding now back to San Diego. How did you get involved then with Outside?
Yeah. So I moved here. I was doing a consulting project for a private equity group on recycling, actually, and on-demand recycling, but I came kind of with a pretty blank slate.
Okay.
And when I arrived here, as I've always found in my life, kind of if you just meet the other startup people and try to be helpful, kind of in any ecosystem, then opportunities arise. So I just kind of figured out who was doing things here, especially in North County, not being downtown. It's an even smaller group of people. Like I said, Grant Cooper was literally one of the first people that I met, and then he connected me to 10 people, and those 10 people connected me to 10 people, and in that kind of constellation of relationships, I met Emmanuel, who's the founder of Outside. So Outside is where we're at right now. It's a co-living company in beautiful places. So we create these villas and we build offices in them, and now we're up to, I don't know, it's like 7 or 8 of them outside of California and Puerto Rico and Costa Rica, and just opened up in Venice. But this was actually only the second property that was in the midst of being opened when I came over here and met Emmanuel, and literally there was like horrible carpet on the floor, and none of this fit out, sort of like the design of the property had been done, and I totally got the culture that Emmanuel was trying to promote, which is letting location independent sort of millennial professionals go anywhere around the world, meet a community of like-minded people, serve, work, whether they're developers, whether they're designers, whether they're project managers, but be able to be productive, but also have that sort of enjoyment in life, whether it's the great outdoors, kind of whether it's the mingling, with other interesting people from all over the world. It just made sense to me. Stay, work, play. I mean, that's Outside's motto: is stay, work, play. So we attract these people that are kind of digital nomads that are going around the world kind of as a lifestyle, and it is a new lifestyle. So I asked Emmanuel, how could I help, and it happened that he was just raising the first kind of round of capital at the time. So I invested in the company, and then I said, if there's any other way I can help, I'm unemployed, I guess I'm underemployed, and I came out here just having that faith that I would find a great opportunity, and then I started helping out in other ways, and helping the company fundraise and helping it grow, and that sort of was what I spent probably the next 6 months or so doing. And to this now Outside's just continued to grow and continued to get better, and Emmanuel's built a great team of people around him, and it's a company that I'm really proud to be a part of.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, this is a great space. I wish the weather was a little bit better, but you can see the water from right here. It's the most beautiful thing ever. So if you guys can come in a daytime event, you're not going to leave the balcony. You'll be amazed.
You've been to a bunch of events, so you're actually an example. One of those people I met, I think, at one of Brant's drink ups, and then you came to an Outside event, and then you kept coming to Outside events, and
I didn't want to leave.
It's you're a perfect example of the kind of community that gets built.
Absolutely, and we are a community here, which I love. Which actually brings me into my next point. So now you're the executive director at Techco's Angels. So how did this come about?
Yeah, so again, just sort of the, I guess, points of serendipity, sort of just, one relationship leads to another. In this case, when we were fundraising for Outside, I got introduced to some of the folks at TCA. Again, part of, I guess, the job in getting funding is figuring out, well, who are the investors, kind of in this community. And it's not San Diego, it's growing, but it's not, New York City, right?
Of course.
So there's only but so many different points of kind of contact. And Eric Gasser, who is the chair of high tech at Outside, Techco's Angels, and happens to have a background in sort of hospitality. Yes. I met him, and he just started mentoring us. And when TCA kind of, 4 months or so into from me meeting Eric, decided they wanted to create a position as an executive director, then Eric encouraged me to, because he saw kind of how I was working with outside, the early stages and helping the company kind of get to the next set of milestones, and he thought I'd be a good fit, having some experience doing startups myself, and just kind of dipping my toes into the investment side, but wanting to learn about that, which is one of the things that made TCA attractive to me. I mean, this is the biggest angel network in Southern California and one of the biggest in the world. So for me to be able to learn from people that have done this successfully for a long time, but then also do what I'm really passionate about, which is helping entrepreneurs achieve their dream, it was a just ideal opportunity, and then it all just came together.
I love Eric. He's actually going to be in your seat in May.
He's been in this seat before at Outside. We did an event with him and Adam from Portfolio. So
I was there. I was there. I sent him an email. I was like, "You're the most fun person I've ever encountered."
Yeah. He's done Eric's more fun than me. He's done a bunch of events with us, and he's just a great example of, I think, why San Diego's winning right now. He is a totally unselfish, completely generous. Has no ulterior motive. I think literally he's done 4 different outside events from here to Santa Cruz and back, and he just gives of his time, he gives of his advice, he gives of his money. I mean, he is the reason, he's the type of reason that San Diego right now is, succeeding. And he absolutely contributed to my own personal development and to Outside's development as a company.
And he got you into Tech Coast Angels.
He did.
So, Tech Coast Angel, do you mind, telling the crowd just a little bit about how TCA works?
Yeah. So it's a professional angel network. There kind of are these groups all over the country, and TCA, our chapter specifically focuses on San Diego, but we have chapters in LA and Orange County. So together there's over 300 members between just these 3 properties, and we try to invest in Southern California companies being Southern California investors, and that's one of the things you'll see with angels even often versus VCs is they tend to want to touch, kind of and know the company and be able to contribute in more ways than just capital. So it's pretty common, although we do also invest in companies from outside of California, but we syndicate those with other angel groups. So syndication with Central Texas Angel Network in Austin, for example. That's a group that we do invest with. But our basic process is you submit an application online, so it's not unlike List or Have Success and these other online platforms, and then I'll look at it with the chair. So we have, like Eric Gasser, is the chair of the high tech committee, and now it's Tim Rout, who's a successful serial founder here in San Diego, and Jeff Friedman, who's the chair of the life science committee. So we'll look over the applications, we'll kind of pick what we think are the best fit for TCA at that time, and then we'll invite those companies to come in and present to a committee, either life science. So life science is like biotech stuff, medical device stuff, some health tech stuff, and then on high tech is sort of everything else. So whether it's software or clean tech or what have you, and then our committee will look at those pitches from the companies who come and present to us in person or on WebEx, and then we'll pick from in any given month up to 10 companies that we'll see present. We'll pick up to 5 to then come and present to our general membership, which is a larger meeting of say 50 to 60 angels. Everybody's an accredited investor in San Diego. And then if we feel like there's enough of an appetite to fund the company within the TCA network, then we go into a diligence process, which we're now trying to get done in 30 days or less. The last financing we did was just about 30 days. It was $2 million, a company called Echo Labs here based in Mission Bay. And we just announced another one at $1 million, Matrices Bioscience. We announced it last week. So these deals we're trying to get done fast. We're trying to put in a significant amount of capital and also contribute to the companies through being on their boards, through helping them with business development, through helping them build their teams. And that's the basic model. So it's about finding the best companies, starting in San Diego, and getting them the capital they need to help them get to the next stage.
Absolutely. So, with your experiences having personally been an angel and then going forward into TCA, what do you feel the current market opportunities in San Diego are?
So I almost hesitate to call myself an angel, and that I've done a little bit of angel investing, but in terms of compared to most of my career, it's only been a fraction. But regardless of kind of the lens that I'm looking at San Diego through, I think there's a few unique advantages, that San Diego has. One is it's an engineering hotbed. UCSD produces more engineers than any other university in the country, including Stanford and MIT. And I think groups like San Diego Venture Group are doing a lot now to try and keep the engineers here instead of the brain drain that's traditionally occurred. And Mike Cran and Ariel and those folks have been amazing and just kind of bringing a voice. I don't know if anybody's seen like the billboards, the snarky billboards they have. Kind of encouraging people to stay in San Diego because it is a great lifestyle. And we're all a testament to that. So that's one advantage. There actually is good technical talent. And that's a fundamental kind of component of any healthy startup ecosystem. I think the fact that San Diego is young but maturing, so it's kind of like on the surf analogy, the wave kind of is really picking up right now and gaining speed. So the timing kind of for San Diego, it's not so established like San Francisco, which obviously is a great amazing place, but it's super competitive, and it's just so easy to get lost kind of in the noise of the ecosystem. San Diego, I think, is small enough that people can know each other, but it's big enough that it still matters, kind of on a global scale. And the timing of sort of the momentum right now, I think is really opportune. And I think part of that is also the growth of other surrounding areas like Mexico, for example, in Tijuana. I know Mia, has been doing a lot, kind of on the binational startup scene, and other folks, including Neil, who you had up there before, and Mil Chan, and many others, kind of. And I think that's something that's really special to me about San Diego.
Absolutely.
You can say, well, we've got great surf here, but you know what? Venice has great surf too. Santa Cruz has great surf. You can say that we're growing fast, but Nashville, Tennessee is growing fast too.
Absolutely.
But one thing San Diego has that none of these other communities have is its proximity to a growing, very smart, very dynamic, culturally community, just in TJ, let alone the other, kind of parts south of the border. And I think that strategic relationship, between San Diego and Mexico can be one of the, assets that is able to really propel, San Diego into that next tier of, kind of top 5, sort of overall, communities.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited personally about, what's going to happen in San Diego. And I guess the last thing, and maybe it's the most important, is just the quality of people here are great.
Absolutely.
I felt welcomed from the day that I got here. And I think people are positive here. People are fun, kind of to be around. People are smart. So for me, it's like, it's the place to be.
I think so. So going forward, after discussing market opportunities, slightly a selfish question, but I'd like to think other people in the crowd have the same. For somebody who is considering being a founder and wants to start their own company, like, where do you suggest that they might, one, start first, and two, like, what resources would you think San Diego has to offer?
So I think there's like 3 reasons to start a company. One is making money, and that's a fair reason. And a lot of people start companies, with the sort of single-minded goal to start money. Another is because you want to pursue a mission. And for me, that's always been, I guess, kind of front and center. But if you're thinking about, you ask the question, should I start a company or not? Well, is there a mission that you want to try and kind of pursue? And then the other is because of a missionary. So I've had companies in the past that I've started because I want to work with somebody who I really believe in side by side. Now, ideally, all 3 of those things are in alignment. Where it's there's an attractive market opportunity, you're pursuing a mission that's important to you, and you're doing it with people that you want to go to war with. It's not always the case that you're going to have all 3 of them, but from what I've seen, when you're just doing it for money, generally it's not going to be as fulfilling and therefore successful. So I personally would always ask myself, and I am now, as I'm always thinking about my next kind of venture, is this a mission that I really care about? So that's how I personally deal with that dilemma, and everybody has to make that decision for themselves.
Absolutely. So, good to know. Are you guys taking notes? Just making sure. So, with that in mind, if we put the pause button right after you started at Tech Coast Angels and you had to look back on your life and everything that you've done, what do you think you would perhaps have done differently?
I think, and you brought up a kind of reflection I had going from the suit to the wetsuit. I think I probably took too long to make that decision that I wanted to achieve greater work-life harmony.
Absolutely.
And my health and some of my relationships and such suffered. Where it's like I'm not being the best friend. That I could be, to my boy that I've known for 20 years. So I think I just would have been a little bit better of a listener, kind of to some of the voices that would speak to me saying, hey man, maybe you should slow down a little bit, hey, maybe it's okay to go out on that Friday night, and hang out with your friends instead of writing that umpteenth email, kind of thing you have to do. So I think we all make a lot of mistakes, and I'm not one to second guess myself on the mistakes that I made, including those, because it all shapes, kind of, who you end up being, as long as you stay in the game. But I think if I could go back in time, I would have just made that shift a little bit sooner.
Absolutely. So, pressing play again on your life. I see that you're now working on the School of Rap, another name I love. So, do you mind telling me a bit about this?
Yeah. Well, it's funny how sometimes everything just becomes sort of cyclical. So I mentioned that, when I first came to North County ever, I've been to conferences downtown, who hasn't, if you work in, sort of corporate, but when I came to visit my friend who was having his baby, and, he is a, really well-respected rapper from Boston, and he's done a bunch of other things too, but, we kind of started the music business at the same time years ago on the East Coast, and, we've stayed best friends throughout this time, and just kind of, he and I will spend time together, just having brunch, talking about, our ideas and our passion. And, recently, I guess, seeing the Hamilton phenomenon, where it's like literally the biggest thing that happened, kind of, pop culture-wise in 2016. And then at the same time having this, passion and love for, hip-hop as this, kind of this voice, kind of struggle. And, our, kind of, I guess, theory is that people, want to use hip-hop now, as a vehicle for creative expression, kind of for empowerment. And there's these models now that exist, like, say, the School of Rock, which is a franchise, that basically teaches people how to play rock music, and that's great. But we looked at kind of like, well, what has the School of Rock done well? And, what are some of the online tools that are available to, kind of, create a hybrid, sort of model? And then what's the cultural interest in, these movements, like Hamilton, and being able to tell stories, through hip hop and through freestyle, which is this really liberating, kind of expression, that I think everybody in a way wants to, be a rapper, whether they admit it to themselves or not. Like they, most of you in here are freestyling in the mirror at some point or another. So, and that's great, and I think young people want to also learn, and now their parents actually want their kids to learn. See, when I started, the record label back in the day, the kids wanted to listen to hip hop music, but the parents didn't want them doing it.
Of course.
Now the change that's happened is parents, including people who have, the resources to be able to, send their kids to, a program like School of Rap, they actually want their kids to do it because they know they could be creating the next, Hamilton.
Absolutely.
And using, hip hop and theater, for example, which hadn't really happened, until, fairly recently. So that's the idea of the School of Rap, is that we're creating, this program to empower young people by teaching them how to freestyle and how to rap and to, talk about issues that are important to them. So
Absolutely.
it's a new, company. We're, just kind of getting it off the ground. It's the schoolofrap.com. It's, we have a landing page up, and we're working on the lean startup, kind of right now, and it's something that you're going to see, in 2017.
Perfect. I'm going to keep my eye out for that.
Okay. Are you going to freestyle
I might be
one of our
people.
ciphers?
I'm the saddest person you'd ever expect to drop a vert line verse. See? So I probably need to go to the School of Rap.
10-week program. Let's see how that.
So with that in mind, kind of circling back to the previous question, asking what you would do differently. Now that you're in a place again where you have a couple things going on that are on your plate, what do you think you're going to do differently to prevent burnout and a few things that happened in the past?
Yeah. Well, I think just going back to, sort of that formula that I found that, is working, I think, for me, because I feel like I'm in a happy, kind of, positive place in my life right now, and, just making sure that I carve out enough time for the, sort of the hobbies and the, sort of, fun things that I want to do. For me, surfing has been transformative because, at 37, which is how old I am right now, it's hard to find something that you've never done before. And I put a wetsuit on backwards the first time. I was on the beach, and usually, right, it makes sense, zipper in the front, right? Not in the front, zipper's on the back. So just FYI, if anybody here is thinking about
Any pics?
That's awesome. Do you have a picture of that?
I don't think they captured that, nor like the next 100 falls, that then I proceeded to enjoy in the ocean. But it's been this amazing experience where it's a challenge, but it's always rewarding, even when you're failing. Which is kind of like if you have the right perspective on a startup, it's kind of like that too. Like even what does it even mean to fail? Well, if you're trying to do something that you care about, that's not failure. So surfing's like that, right? It's like, yeah, you gotta get your ass beat over and over and over again, and have some pretty embarrassing, kind of somersaults off the surfboard, face planting into and then you realize you're only a foot deep in the ocean. And of course I live in Cardiff, so there's a 6-year-old kid that's riding a wave next to me, and I'm just so just having for me, that specifically, surfing is a very tangible, kind of challenging yet rewarding activity that I can dedicate myself to, and just try and over time master. I've gotten a little better, meaning I know I put the wetsuit on now, so the next actually my turns and kind of the other maybe intermediate kind of level stuff.
Absolutely.
And I just plan to continue to do that and just to connect with great people, kind of in this San Diego community, and I'm not worried at all. I am worried about being able to kind of ride in the barrel of a wave. I'm not that worried at all about being able to meet great people in San Diego.
I love that. So with my closing question before I open it up for Q&A is, sticking with startup grind traditions, what can people in this group here perhaps do to help you in your mission?
If there's any surf instructors, I'm always buddies to go out there with, and I've already got a really good group of friends that have been helping me there, but I need a lot of help. On sort of a professional level, and with TCA, we're always looking for the best companies. The best companies come to us through the best entrepreneurs, through the best investors. So referring people you might know that are trying to raise capital for their high growth startups. That's definitely something that we're always looking for. For School of Rap, feel free to check out the landing page, theschoolofrap.com, and we're just building up the email list and getting people's feedback on that as we unroll it. But I definitely, for me, I want to be helpful, to everyone here and everybody, beyond here as well in the community. So, that's really my goal, kind of for this year, is to just, contribute in small ways, to this movement that I see happening in San Diego, at a rapid pace. And if I can do that, then I'll feel successful.
Of course, I love that. With that, you all, I give you a show. At this point in time, I will open it up for Q&A. John?
Yeah, what do you think is the question that a person needs to ask if they want to found a startup or join a startup?
Yeah, so first I think they have to ask that question. And I think that's a really important question, right? Because the mistake I think a lot of people make is, I need to start a company. So you asked the right question.
Right.
I want to be in a startup. Is it going to be mine, or is it going to be me joining another team?
Right.
As to making that distinction, well, if I'm going to start a company, then it means I have to have a lot of sort of pieces in place, right? I mean, again, there's a mission that you figured out that you think is a problem that needs to be solved. There's a market opportunity that's kind of attractive from an economic standpoint. There's maybe a team that you have in place that's going to be able to help you achieve this goal against the odds. Do you have the personal financial kind of bandwidth to be able to maybe not make money for 6 months, a year, 2 years? That's a pragmatic kind of issue that you have to discuss. Is your family able to, be supportive, or, if you're out there, kind of long hours, does it put pressure on, your spouse, let's say, to be able to pick the kids up from daycare? So you have to ask all of these, questions about, is this the right time for the company, and is it the right time for me in my life? If it's not, on both, then I think that's when you say, well, the good news is there's this other path. Maybe I can go and take a little bit of a haircut, and go and join another company that's doing something that I care about, but not have to assume the same level of, kind of risk and volatility.
Thank you.
Kevin.
You mentioned earlier that if you could change something or go back, you kind of wish you had listened to the voices that said slow down.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you think that you would be, assuming you're happy where you are, do you think you'd be where you are if you did listen to those voices at that time?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fascinating hypothetical, kind of question to answer.
Well, for your case
I
specifically.
think I would still be, I hope I would still be doing something, that I feel
You'd be
happy
married
about.
in the suburbs.
Right, exactly.
That's kind of my question. Like, do you
I'd
think
be living in Kentucky, and it's I guess it's totally, it's impossible to say for sure, but I can say that one way or the other, when I've kind of, even if I was maybe grinding too hard on my own, I still was surrounded by people that were kind of supportive and inspiring to me. So I had that inspiration capital kind of around me that was just sort of accumulating and accumulating. So then when I made those decisions, I think the key is when I made the decision, the universe was there to kind of conspire to help me kind of get to the next goal that I had in mind.
How do you keep inspiring your team when you're at a really low as a founder?
Yeah. So this is where you have that imposter syndrome where it's like, oh man, I know that payroll's at risk, mañana, and I need to still kind of keep the team engaged and motivated. It's hard. That's one of the unique pressures of the founder and the CEO, that you can't outsource that. You can again build a community of people that can relate to it, which helps. But I think this is where when you start a company that's centered on a mission versus a company that's centered on just making money. Maybe the money's not going to be there for that PPM campaign next month. But we're still trying to make sure that people get healthy meals delivered to them at a convenient kind of and fairly priced way. There's for example a mission around that. Maybe the payroll's not going to be there next week, so the money's not going to be there. But we're helping senior citizens kind of feel dignity. Whatever your mission is, the mission's still there even when the money's not. That allows you the oxygen to then be able to still have a chance to make the money.
First, thank you for your time, and second,
Thank you guys.
do you have a favorite book, and why is it your favorite?
Yeah. Well, I guess kind of apropos to today's conversation, one of my favorite books is The Startup Life by Brad Feld. And it's all about navigating a relationship, kind of with an entrepreneur. All the stuff that the entrepreneur is going through. How is their spouse kind of understanding of that, and then at the same time, how is the entrepreneur understanding to the spouse that may not have had that direct experience, kind of with what it's like to make a startup. So I think there's a lot of books. I consider myself a pretty avid reader. That I love, but I guess considering the context here for Startup Grind, I have gifted that book. I'm not kidding, to 10 people, including recently. Cody Barbo is probably a founder here that you guys have met, and he's about to get married. He's just an awesome guy, and he's building an awesome company, Industry. So that's just one example of, I think, literally the last time that I gifted, which was a couple weeks ago. So my point being that I would not start a company, in a relationship without reading that book. So I think it's important.
Thank you.
Speaking of Industry, they'll be our guest for April.
And Cody's a really good speaker, and has a great team around
So
him,
it's going to be Matt.
and a great fiance.
But just as great.
Matt's also great. Matt's a great guy too. Follow Matt on Twitter. He's quite active.
Please do. Please do. Any more questions?
Well, I just want to say I'm super excited to hear that when you open up, you were talking about being a social entrepreneur, and what a great example you are of what a social entrepreneur is
Thanks.
and can be, and sort of as we're talking about the growth of the industry of social entrepreneurship as a whole.
Yeah.
People have such set ideas of what a social entrepreneur is, right? It's only those companies that are working to serve people in India that don't have access to water or sanitation and whatnot. But when you think about it and you look at real life examples of social entrepreneurs, you can see so many ways in which you can tie both your mission and also be able to make money, and those two things go hand in hand, and there's no shame in that, right?
Absolutely.
And so thank you for talking about your social entrepreneurship journey.
Yeah, well-
because I think we need more conversations around that.
Thank you. And there's entities here in San Diego like Impact Without Borders that's specifically focusing on training social entrepreneurs, and at SDSU they've got the Launchpad incubator and all at USD. I mean everywhere. I think there's now specific deliberate programs to be able to promote social entrepreneurship, and I think it's a function of what we've seen happen in the last 10 years or so, where companies that are doing really good things and changing the world in a positive way are also becoming $100 million companies and $1 billion companies. And even if they're not that big, they're still being able to be viable companies. Much like San Diego, I think right now is the timing for being here is really good. The timing on a global level for being a social entrepreneur, when that was a word, when Raptivism started, literally social entrepreneurship wasn't even a term that was used, and then through, my business school experience and Net Impact, all these organizations emerged that, were supportive of social entrepreneurship and celebrating entrepreneurship, and then companies, like Nest, and Airbnb that, got really big, kind of having not just a financial, value and motive, but also doing something socially or environmentally. So you have these wins, and wins create wins, and that's why I think this is a really exciting time to be a social entrepreneur. I hope that we forget the word social entrepreneurship, in a few years, and just all entrepreneurship is social entrepreneurship.
So, any more questions? Go ahead, just in the back.
Yeah. When you first started out, I guess coming from a young guy's perspective, trying to enter a world that's already dominated by people who've been in the industry for years. Two questions, I guess. How would you feel asking for help from someone in the same industry as a competitor of yours? And then secondly is, how do you actually feel competing against, or how did you get over the fact that you were competing against such experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the sort of liberating parts of entrepreneurship is that, if anything, it sometimes age discriminates the wrong way, right? Where, if you're over 40 years old, you can't get into, the good accelerator program, and that's ridiculous, because actually the research shows that people that start a business after coming out of industry and are, by the way, married or in a stable relationship, those are two of the factors, sort of counterintuitive, that all else being equal, increase your odds of success. So, I think entrepreneurship, kind of spans, and in fact, one of the largest, fastest growing demographics of entrepreneurship is sort of people in their golden years, right now. But one of my professors in business school, Ed Rogoff, wrote a book about that recently. So it's something that's interesting that's happening. But coming back, to me, maybe I should have said before, when you asked me a mistake that I made, not asking for help, early enough. I think I was forced to ask for help and to need help, when I was struggling, kind of with the direction to take the business into, and I was just blessed to have a mentor that found me when I needed him. His name is Ray Garcia, and he's a amazing entrepreneur, executive investor in New York City, who I guess took enough of a liking to this fairly young kid at the time that was trying to do something ambitious, and spent the time with me to figure out how stupid I really was, but said it in a really, tactful, kind of and loving way, and then not just told me, but helped me, kind of, fix some of the things that I was doing wrong. And I think through his example, that's how I learned that it was not just okay, but necessary to accept help. And he showed me instead of telling me how to do it.
Any suggestions on how to find a mentor? can you do it in a deliberate way, or is it one of those things like if someone shows up in your life, just having like the ability to recognize it, you know?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you know?
Yeah. So there's like people like, you know, Brent is a mentor to me.
I wasn't even going to say that, but there is a mentor speed dating event going on in a couple of weeks, so that's one way.
But I mean, yeah.
Where can we find out about it?
I wasn't going to push my, you know. Yeah, so I don't know if people have heard of Startup San Diego and San Diego Startup Week. So we do a mini version of Startup Week in the winter. It's called Convergence, and that's happening January 25, 26, 27. So it's all downtown, but you know, there's a demo night. I think there's a startup crawl, right, Regina? And usually there's some sort of a game night, and there's a mentor night, and actually on the Wednesday is a reception for nonprofits and social impact entrepreneurs. So a whole bunch of events squeezed into 3 days, and that's 25, 26, 27. So you can Google Startup San Diego or San Diego Startup Week Convergence, and you should be able to get all of the events.
There's also hockey night, don't forget.
Hockey night. I said game night, so that.
Also like $5 and that's it for everything, and you can be a part of it.
Yeah, it's really ridiculously low cost. We're a nonprofit actually at Startup San Diego, so it's really all about community.
And that event is one of the first major, if not the first major events that I went to when I moved here. Met Amanda, who's back there, who's an amazing founder of running Resort Pass here in San Diego. Remember, that's when we met. I was in my wetsuit at the time, at Eagle Neck.
A random guy in his wetsuit walking downtown. How can you not say hi to him?
So the call from Austin, the folks that organized it, they were like, you know, come in your attire that represents your startup. So outside being, I mean, you see the surfboards all over, and you know, Emmanuel's an amazing surfer, and Britt and all those folks. So I came in my wetsuit. You know, it was an amazing event. You know, I met great people that today have become my friends.